Hello everyone, welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey-Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of APA and Chair of APA's New Urbanism Division, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, June 17th, and we will hear the presentation, Where We Want to Live. For technical help during today's webcast, just type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call that 1-800 number that you see there. For your content questions related to the presentation, you can type those in the questions box that's located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of the 2016 sponsoring chapters, APA chapters and divisions. Thanks to all the participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to their members. In particular, today's webcast is sponsored by the Transportation Planning Division. To learn more about this division, you can go to planning.org/division/transportation, or you can learn about all our divisions by going to planning.org/divisions or planning.org/chapters to learn more about our chapters. And coming up on your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. To register for these, just visit our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, just head over to planning.org and log into your My APA account, and then select Search for CM Activities. And in the search bar, you can either type the event number or the title of today's webcast, both of which can be found again on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And this webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We do have some recorded webcasts that are available for distance education, and for availability of that and how to go about viewing them, again, webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our upcoming sessions. And we are recording today's webcast, and it will be available on our YouTube channel. You can just search Planning Webcast on YouTube or visit youtube.com/planningwebcast. And we'll also have a PDF up of the presentation after the session has ended, again, on our webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Ryan Gravel, who is today's speaker. So Ryan, it is all you.
Great. Thank you, Christine. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great.
Perfect.
Thank you for having me. Thanks to the Ohio chapter for sponsoring this and the Transportation Division for making it happen. I'm happy to be here. I've been a planner, AICP, for a long time, and good to be among my peers and share our story and what some of the work that I've been doing in Atlanta. I always wanted to start with pictures of my grandmother. I never really thought of her as a revolutionary, but she was. And we'll get to that in a minute. But it was an inspiration for my book, which just came out in March. It's made by St. Martin's Press. It's called Where We Want to Live: Reclaiming Infrastructure for a New Generation of Cities. And it's written as a narrative, as a story, like the story of all of our lives. I never really saw my grandparents and my own family as part of a story of urban planning, but they are, and you'll see that a little bit today, and see how we might rewrite our own stories or write new stories for the future of cities. Written from my particular obsession, written in the language of infrastructure. So we'll get to that. You can see she's literally in the book, and The book, like I said, just came out in March, and it was an unbelievable amount of work, but it was a lot of fun. And it tells the story that I'm going to share with you today, and a lot of the ideas about urban planning and the future of cities, but written in the narrative format. In addition to writing the book, I'm also an urban planner. I have my own company called Six Pitch in Atlanta, work on different kinds of projects, mostly in an advisory kind of role. We put together vision plans for, we just did a project for the Chattahoochee River in Atlanta, and working on a new project for the city of Atlanta called the Atlanta City Design. Very exciting work that's mostly focused on the future of cities and the places that we call home. I also live on the Atlanta Beltline, so you'll hear the story of that soon, but I use it every day in my 6-minute bicycle commute to work in Atlanta, which is a lot of fun. Today we're going to talk about sort of 5 chapters of ideas. One is about sort of backing up and looking at change and the context and ideas about how cities change that really inspired my work and the Atlanta Beltline specifically. Then we'll get into some detail about the Atlanta Beltline for any of you who might not be familiar with it. We'll then put that in a larger national, global context of what I call catalyst infrastructure projects that are changing the way that we still see cities and build cities around the world. The book gets into 8 lessons about that catalyst infrastructure, and we'll talk through each of those. And then we'll end with sort of backing up a little bit again to describe what this all means and why it matters to the world, why we should care. Some of you may have seen the Atlanta Beltline before. It wasn't that long ago that it looked like this, abandoned railroads circling Atlanta with, obsolete or abandoned, at least underutilized, adjacent industrial properties. And today that same view looks like this. And if you're in Atlanta, that's a fantastic steak restaurant on your left. It's my favorite place to go with my wife when we can leave the kids at home and have a glass of wine and watch the world go by on the Atlanta Beltline. It's pretty fun. So you can see the kind of change that I'm talking about, both the physical change in the physical form of the city, but also changing the way that we think about the city and the kinds of things that we do, and our expectations, not only for our city, but for our lives. That idea about change started for me with a year abroad in Paris. I was studying architecture at Georgia Tech as an undergrad, and participated in an exchange program where I went to Paris for my senior year. And within a month, I'd lost 15 pounds and was in the best shape of my life because I was walking wherever I went and I was eating fresh food from the market. And the relationship of the physical world that I was living in, and my own personal health and well-being was made clear to me in a way that it really had never been before. I grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta. I grew up driving on our perimeter highway every day. There was both a physical and cultural kind of change in the way that I saw the world. In particular in Paris, I got obsessed with the role of infrastructure in the creation of that city. And you can't look very long at Paris without recognizing the grand boulevards that were plowed through the medieval city by Napoleon III. They came at a great cost to the people in the way, the businesses and livelihoods of those medieval streets. You can see here the Avenue de l'Opera being plowed through that part of the city. But they also came with great social benefit. They came with water and sewer. They came with paved surfaces for wheeled carts and wagons. Came with street trees and public spaces and fountains. Eventually there was electric street lighting and subways, and the infrastructure of that was being built created the fundamental sort of iconic view of what an aesthetic of what Paris looks like. But it was important to acknowledge that it wasn't just infrastructure as a way to move people around or to convey water or sewer, but it also created an entirely new way of life for the people of Paris. It made a new way of life possible, and it created the iconic forms and images that still very much define Paris today, that were important aspects of its cultural development, its political and military development, that literally the Grand Boulevards, his premise was to clean up the dank, damp streets filled with disease and social unrest, now became these iconic sort of portals for a new cultural, a new way of life, where literally the Impressionist painters were painting the light that was now streaming down into the city and creating views like this by Pissarro that really created a new identity, cultural identity for Paris. And so that what they were building was more than just infrastructure. They were creating a new way of life for the people. And of course, I came back home and realized that not obviously the rest of the world also was built in similar layers or similar impacts of infrastructure. And this is much of the country was opened up by railroads, and that was certainly true of Georgia. You see people in Valdosta, waiting for the train to Atlanta. When they got there were multiple ways to get there. Trains opened up the upstate part of Georgia and other places to access the natural resources that were sort of fuel economy and create a new way of life and open up North America for European settlers. And there were train stations built all over the state, and you could go to any of them as fast as you could, as a train could go. And once you got there, you could get anywhere in the city you wanted. Atlanta had over 300 miles of hard track trolley that would take you anywhere in the region that you wanted to go. And they were used as tools for opening up new land for development. This is Edgewood Avenue, opening up new land for the development of Inman Park neighborhood. So the relationship between an infrastructure as a tool for basically a tool for urban expansion, creating a way of life for people that supported their aspirations and their economy. It's a good lesson. I mean, that was sort of what I was sort of learning at the time. Of course, it wasn't just Atlanta. Here's a picture of Detroit, which is known, of course, for automobiles, but was once had a beautiful sort of ballet of streetcars and cars and pedestrians and bicycles and every other form you might imagine. One of the great cities of the 20th century. And this is Cleveland. And the point is that we were building infrastructure to support a new way of life. We were supporting infrastructure that would support a new economic opportunities and our aspirations for our families and our worldview. And in that process, as the great industrial cities of America were built, we were building more than just infrastructure. We were building a way of life for ourselves. Now, of course, a lot of that infrastructure and that way of life came with problems. It came with environmental chemical pollution. This is the Cuyahoga River on fire. It came with overcrowded, unsanitary conditions for housing in cities everywhere, social unrest, and all kinds of terrible conditions. This is Mayor Hartsfield in Atlanta looking at a slum that would later be demolished in urban renewal for the Civic Center. And that way, that condition of cities, that they were not places where a lot of people didn't want to be, that they were dangerous, and crime and pollution and poor air quality and health conditions sort of created a cultural condition where we wanted to escape the city. We wanted to get away, and we created both through business, creating sort of innovating through the technology of automobiles and air conditioning and all kinds of other things, and created a new way of new systems and mechanisms for new life. And government also innovating in infrastructure. You know, the interstate highways didn't happen overnight. They were an evolution where people were going from one city to the next, learning from each other and building eventually a system that became ubiquitous. But at first it was very much an innovative new infrastructure to support a new aspiration or new expectation for our lives. And that's what this represents. And in the process, of course, we built that new way of life. We opened up an entirely new way of living for people. It wasn't available to everyone, and it's important to note that it was only available to white people, mostly of certain income, that were allowed to then escape a city fueled by infrastructure of highways and the technology of automobiles and everything else, and created a new way of life. Now, of course, through the advancement of civil rights, you know, now sprawl is available to everyone, but it's important just the lesson, the idea is to look at the role of the infrastructure and what it does to our lives. It certainly happened in my own life. This is where my grandmother's story comes in, where my grandfather was a banker, and his boss, when he got married, convinced him to buy a house on the outskirts of town. This is Alexandria, Louisiana, modest, medium-sized city in the center of the state. And you know, they bought. It looks like Levittown, New York, but the story happened everywhere. It was the first wave of suburbanization, and they rented rooms to servicemen in World War II, and was part of that great sort of epic American story of suburbanization in the early 1940s. Fueled, of course, like I said, through the advancement of technology on the business side and through infrastructure on the government side. And we were building, you know, we were building the foundation of urban sprawl, of course, but we didn't call it sprawl at the time. We called it the future, and it was. And you can't separate the creation of the physical world that we were building from the other cultural advancements and other things that were happening at that time. You know, science was lifting us to the moon and curing diseases. The sexual revolution was breaking down barriers, and the civil rights movement was marching toward the fulfillment of our nation's promise. All of these things were happening at the same time we were building the foundation of sprawl. Which brings me back to my family story. Again, this is my family. My parents moved me and my brothers when we were just little kids to Metro Atlanta from Louisiana in the early 1970s, attracted to the growth, the booming growth that was happening in metropolitan Atlanta as a result of the highways that we'd been building since the 50s. And in particular, the construction of 285, our perimeter highway, where we found a house in a neighborhood that was literally incentivized by the construction of the perimeter highway. My dad took a job with an engineering firm designing pump stations and wastewater treatment plants to support the sprawling economy of the region. Literally, that investment in highways lifted millions of Americans' economic prosperity, including my own family. My parents grew up reasonably poor, and it put dinner on our table and lifted us to economic prosperity. It sent me to college. It did what city building is supposed to do. And again, it wasn't available to everyone even at that time, but it outside of that, it was certainly doing what it was intended to do. Of course, the sprawl and the conditions that we've created have had outcomes that we weren't expecting necessarily. The open road is no longer open for most people, and the highways that sliced across cities everywhere contributed significantly to their decline. And the physical separation of what we created instead is astounding and has created all kinds of other problems for ourselves. You can see the separation of people who make different incomes and people who are doing different things, shopping or living or going to school. The physical places that we've created have highly separated us from each other and degraded tradition of doing anything other than driving. Not that driving is really that great anymore. And there are enormous health costs, as planners you're all aware of. And there are amazing, remarkable environmental costs to everything that's been left behind in its wake of sprawl, and the social costs of isolation. And you look at the political environment that we're in now, I think there's the polarization of people today is largely because of the physical separation and isolation of people. We don't engage with each other anymore. We don't talk to each other. We don't see each other. And a lot of that is because the physical separation, like you can see in this image, but also, when everybody drives, driving is an inherently unsocial way of getting around. When you're on a train, and I learned this in Paris, when you're on the train or walking down the street or biking, you look people in the eye, you see people that you recognize. You may not know them, but they're your friends and they're your neighbors, and they're people who have a similar routine from you, and they may be very different from you, and you learn to empathize with people who are different. When you're driving, everybody's face forward, you got your music going, you can pass hundreds of thousands of cars every day, but you never look anybody in the eye. And I think it's not to say that driving is bad, it's just to say that it's one of the challenges created by the world that we built. Obviously, huge economic costs, not only to central cities, but also to suburban areas. This is where I grew up in Chamblee, outside of Atlanta. When I was a kid, it was full of national brand stores, the shopping center was, and today it sits essentially empty, left behind by the wake of urban sprawl. And so you can see that the kind of condition that we built for ourselves, as we've done it, as we built it, and moved everybody and everything toward a sort of a way of life built around car dependency. We're doing more than just building infrastructure. We're creating a way of life for ourselves. That is, not all bad, but it certainly brings its fair share of challenges. And that's the context within which the Beltline came to life. So I grew up, that last slide was my worldview of what I expected from the world. And then I went to Paris and began to see the world differently. When I came back for graduate school in city planning and architecture joint degree, I needed a project that would span, a thesis project that would span both planning and design, so planning at a city scale. And the Atlanta Beltline was my thesis for that. And at the time, the city of Atlanta looked like this. It was the late 90s. The communities had stabilized from a generation of decline. The city of Atlanta had lost a fifth of its population in the 70s and 80s, but it had stabilized and was poised for growth. And the Atlanta Beltline came around as an idea to repurpose old railroads and degraded industrial land for something else, to create a new way of life, make a new way of life possible in the city, and in the process change the way we think about Atlanta. So as an overview, the Atlanta Beltline is made up of 4 historic Beltline railroads that create a rough loop around downtown. It's 22 miles long. It's 2 to 4 miles out from downtown in any direction, so it's fairly close in. 45 neighborhoods along the way, about 100,000 people within walking distance. And that yellow area is the redevelopment area, which is all the industrial, obsolete, abandoned industrial land that follows these old freight railroad corridors. The city of Atlanta was formed by the railroad. That's why we exist. It's a railroad junction. But these Beltline railroads were built after the Civil War to expand the city's industrial base. So through Reconstruction, the city was booming, and the industry was getting pushed out of downtown, and the railroad companies built this loop of old railroads around the city to support industrial development of the city. The industry moved out to this outer loop area and used it for a long time, but then and the city grew up around it, so the neighborhoods, only the major streets cross, and the neighborhoods on one side of the tracks or the other side of the tracks were frequently disconnected and different from a socioeconomic perspective. As people abandoned trolleys in favor of cars, industry also abandoned the railroads in favor of trucks. The big trucks on neighborhood streets really contributed to blight in a lot of these neighborhoods. And with suburbanization and white flight, this area was really left behind until the late 90s, when growth was picking back up in the city, and people saw these tracts of land as, at least in certain parts of town, as ideal sites for redevelopment. Mostly today the Beltline looks like this, although you'll see some other pictures, and this view in particular is now under construction for the West Side Trail, which will open early 2017. But a lot of emptiness. It looks like you're out in the country, even though you're very close to downtown. Big tracts of land with skyline views and great neighborhoods. A certain kind of industrial, sort of gritty beauty along the way. A lot of backdoor conditions. Parking garages and other things were jammed up against the railroad. You can see the proximity to downtown. If you're familiar with Ponce City Market in Atlanta, that's it in the foreground, the old Sears and Roebuck distribution building, the largest building in the southeastern United States, just in the last year reopening as Ponce City Market, with over 1 million square feet of office and residential and retail, a big food hall directly accessible to the Beltline. But you can see how the abandoned railroad as a diagram works, flanked on either side by obsolete, underutilized industrial properties. On the other side of that, from these great neighborhoods that Atlantans really love. Atlanta's a city of neighborhoods, and that's West End on the right and Oakland City on the left. So I graduated in '99 with a joint degree from architecture and city planning, and never imagined that we would actually build this thing. Went to work for an architecture firm. We were doing mixed-use urban infill type projects to support the population growth in the city. And on one site, we had a 20-acre site. We're trying to decide, do you take the parking garage and jam it up against the abandoned railroad, or do you orient the project toward the railroad, hoping it will become something else one day? And I was telling my coworkers about this idea I had in school for that railroad, and they thought it was cool because they lived in neighborhoods along the way, and we were doing a lot of work in the quarter. And so we started talking to people about it, and the more people we talked to, the more people wanted to hear about it. And so we eventually, this is the summer of 2001, we mailed out a letter with some maps to everybody we could think of, the governor, the mayor, all the regional planning agencies, the DOT. Got a lot of nice letters on letterhead with saying, nice idea, good luck with that. But got a great response from Kathy Woolard. She was on city council. She was chair of the transportation committee, which is the reason she got our letter. And she was, she had a meeting of all the regional transit agencies, MARTA, and the DOT, other folks, and said, what are you doing for the city of Atlanta? And if you don't know, the city of Atlanta is only 1/10 of the regional population. And it's impossible to sort of shape urban growth policy. Not impossible, but it's difficult. And she was like, what's happening for the city of Atlanta in terms of public transit? And they were all, showed their ideas about moving people from way outside of town into downtown and back home at the end of the day, not really for people who live in the city, who are more likely to want transit, more likely to ride transit, more likely to pay for transit, have been paying for transit for 30 years with MARTA, and a large proportion of people who were dependent on transit to get around because they couldn't afford a car. There really wasn't anything in any of those plans for those people. And so she was just frustrated, and she went back to her office literally that day. This letter was on her desk, and she opened it up and she thought, wow, this is for people in the city, her constituents. And so she called us in and we told her more about the project, and she asked us if we would do a town hall meeting in the church basement in Virginia Highland, which we did. And from that point on, the neighborhood just really loved the idea. They fell in love with this vision that they saw that was better than anything anybody else was offering them. And we did a few of those meetings in her district, and that fall she was elected city council president. So we took that conversation citywide, and for 2.5 years, I was doing 3 and 4 public meetings a week for 2.5 years, and so was she and her staff and a handful of volunteers. And we created an amazing grassroots movement in support of this idea, of this vision for the future of Atlanta, that eventually got a lot of other people on board and sort of took on a life of its own. We started with the core sort of constituencies, these 3 groups at the same table, community people who were mostly had been fighting against things for a generation, but found in the Atlanta Beltline something that they could fight for. Developers who were looking to make a buck, to take advantage of growth in the city, and environmentalist groups, which I use the term loosely to mean the built environment, and all the nonprofit organizations that they're working in that kind of space and see the Beltline as a way to support their mission in a larger context. So whether they're advocating for natural environmental conditions, the tree canopy, biodiversity, or bikes, pets, housing, transit, those kinds of things. And usually these groups of people aren't used to being at the same table wanting the same outcome. So it was really unusual and kind of strange. But there we were, and it worked, and it was really powerful, and it brought a lot of other people to the table. So you had housing advocates talking to preservationists, for example, saying, hey, maybe our people who need housing can live in your old buildings. And not all of these conversations were obviously successful, but they created an environment where there was a real sense of collaboration and ownership and even authorship of what this idea was that would benefit not only the Atlanta Beltline, but the city as a whole. So we were talking about 3 primary ideas. And I may not have been clear, but the idea with the 22-mile loop of old railroads is converted into a 22-mile loop of streetcars and multi-use trail. So for transportation, you've got both multimodal, both streetcar and bikes and ped trail for the full 22-mile loop. It'll link to MARTA at each of the 4 compass points, our subway system, to existing and future trails as they come in and out of the city. The second piece was economic development, and that is on the north and east side of town where there was already a lot of growth, is a way to manage that growth and quality of life in the face of new traffic and density. And in the south and west sides of town where there hasn't been anything new in 30 or 40 years, it was a way to incentivize new economic development in those communities and rebalance growth in the city. The third piece was green space, and mostly connecting existing green spaces, big parks and small neighborhood parks, cultural and historic destinations, the botanical gardens, the zoo, the Carter Center, the King District, all those things are on the Beltline. And also, if you don't have a natatorium in your neighborhood, you could get to one that does. That was the idea. And what was amazing is that as we built those constituencies, the different new constituencies would come to the table to talk about the project. The idea expanded beyond what any of us ever imagined was even possible in the beginning. So in 2004, the Trust for Public Land came in and said, that's cute that you guys want to connect 700 acres of existing parks, but what about building 1,400 acres of new parks carved out of that old industrial belt, including the quarry there in that picture, which will be the city's new largest park, West Side Reservoir Park. The mayor, Franklin, at the time said, what better place for affordable housing than on a transit line where people can afford to also not have a car. And now it's the largest affordable housing initiative in the city's history. It's not enough, but it's a start. But it's new housing, and so what about existing communities where people live on lower fixed income? How can we help them? And there's a toolkit being put together to help those folks. In public art and preservation, ideas for not only enriching the lives of people, residents and businesses, but also people but the industrial land that follows it is also a barrier. But you take that railroad and you make it into a transit line and trail, a transit greenway. New parks where they make sense, where the city owns property, connecting routes to adjacent neighborhoods. Extension of the street grid across the areas, that not only so that people who live in the neighborhood to the north can get to the Beltline, but also so that you're creating the dimension. Each one of the state, but it won't in a timely way, but it will accommodate whatever future it needs. New public space, the idea to infill with significant development that supports the land use transit leadership, but is still compatible with the market and with the adjacents. It bore everybody to death with all the plans that it's taken to get this these ideas off the ground and get it going. And there are more happening. It seems like every day or every week. But the important thing is that it's happening in partnership, a really messy. Say that with love. I mean, it's a great partnership of people that it takes a foot off. The Atlanta Beltline Partnership, which is the board, is a nonprofit partners. We do primarily with the private sector and nonprofit sector through capital pains, bus tours, 5K runs, things, making sure that people are aware of the project, making sure that sort of being the conscious of the project, especially on displacement and health and community development. And then Atlanta Beltline Inc. is an entity that was created to build the project, so funded through a tax increment finance district. They're charged with coordinating with public sector entities, other pots of money, both federal, state, region. Generating income that's being used for purchasing corridor. This is the southeast or southwest line, which is now under construction, but was first opened up as an interim trail. Building permanent trails, building new parks. This is a park that not only is a wonderful amenity for the neighborhood and for new development, but also protects the downstream properties from flooding. This is the first skate park in the city, expanded and renovated existing parks. Transit, it's on its way. The streetcar downtown this next phase will turn up into the corridor. Atlanta's facing a referendum in the fall that will generate sufficient money to build the transit on the Beltline among many other projects. Very exciting. And this is the plan. You can go to AtlantaBeltline.org and download the strategic implementation plan. You can see how all the bits and pieces, all the complexity of the parts of the project gets built out over time. But the tax increment district will be over in 2031, and the city is obligated to build the project by that point. And so this is how that would happen. The transit referendum in the fall would accelerate this schedule, which is exciting. This is the trail implementation. This is where we are now, so we're only in the early stages of implementation. We don't have any transit built yet, but the blue part of the that economic story, of course, is that it's changing the way that we live our lives in Atlanta, that we're building more than just infrastructure. We're building a way of life for ourselves, and that's really incredible in a city that's known for urban sprawl and car dependency. To create a way of life where it's much easier to live without a car is important for lots of reasons, but also quite wonderful for those of us who do it.
Hey, Ryan.
Oh,
yes. I need to interrupt you for a second. In the last probably 5 or 10 minutes, your audio has been shifting in and out.
Okay.
Your screen is fine. It's just your audio. Would you mind trying to call in with the telephone real quick instead of using your computer?
Sure, I can try.
Okay. I'm just going to, everyone, just give us 2 seconds so we can get the audio worked out. I'm going to take your screen away just so you can do what you need to do. If you go back into the email that you used earlier today to log in, there's a telephone number. So if you could just call in, I think it might be better for our audio quality.
Okay.
Hold tight, everybody. And let me know if you need the number. Did you find it okay?
Yeah. You there? You there?
Yes, I just need you to change your audio over to telephone, please, in your GoToWebinar tool panel.
Okay.
Wonderful. Okay. I'm going to
better?
change the presentation back to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Sorry, everyone. Sorry about that. Okay, so I've told you about the Atlanta Beltline. I want to put it into a national context, global context for what's happening, because one of the things that I've really enjoyed about our success is that in Atlanta is I get to go around and tell our story and share it with other people in other cities. And what I've learned is that while our story is, pretty great. There are a lot of other things happening in other cities that are similarly transformational. And I think that together, they really mean something. Back in Paris, when I lived there that year abroad in 94 and 95, I lived next to this thing. This was a elevated old railroad track that I used to walk underneath to get to the laundromat or to the grocery store. Never really gave it much thought, to be honest with you, because I was so mesmerized by Paris. And when I went back a couple of years later, it had been transformed into the Viaduct des Arts, the spaces below the railroad tracks converted to art galleries and cafes. Really amazing space. And up top was this linear park, the Promenade Fontaine, about 3 miles from the Bastille out toward the Bois de Vincennes on the east side of the city. Really amazing transformation, and really got me thinking about the repurposing old infrastructure for a new way of life, for new kind of living. And I've been researching these projects everywhere as I've discovered people working on them. I'm sure everyone here has somebody has some project in that city that's similarly catalytic. The High Line in New York, I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. The High Line in New York, of course, elevated railroad converted to a linear park. The 606 in Chicago, I've not seen it in its built form. It just opened a year ago, but a 3-mile bikeway built out of an old railroad in Wicker Park in Bucktown. In Philadelphia, the Rail Park, extraordinary physical experience, a third of it, a mile of it in a tunnel like this, a mile below the street level but open to the sky, and then another mile lifting up over the city like the High Line. Amazing. They're just about to kick off the first leg of the first phase of the project, and still imagining how they might make the rest of it happen. In Singapore, I saw about a little over a year ago, this is a 15-mile abandonment across the whole country island, and had the pleasure of speaking with the people who were building it because they see the Atlanta Beltline as their primary model, not only for the physical transformation of what the old railroad becomes, but for the idea that it's focused on communities and what those communities want and the infrastructure that they need for their lives. The KD Trail in Dallas, our Buddhist Quarter in Vancouver, there's a lot of talk about that these days, what it might and what it should become. In Toronto, the Green Line, not only on railroads, this is a power line easement through the northern neighborhoods around Toronto. In New Orleans is a Lafitte Greenway. It started as a portage route between the Bayou St. John and the backside of the French Quarter, a service way to service the French Quarter. Then it was a canal for 150 years, and then it was filled in, and they built a railroad, and then they abandoned the railroad, and was just left abandoned for a generation. And now it's turned into Lafitte Greenway, which opened last summer. In Minneapolis, the Midtown Greenway was a similar railroad project. The trail is built, the transit is coming on the left. In Detroit, similar project, the DeQuinder Cut trail on the right, future transit on the left. In Salt Lake City, they built the transit, and that's basically what the Beltline will look like one day, minus the mountain range in the background. In Miami, there's an elevated 80s era transit line that this is the before condition, completely renovating the space below, eliminating a lot of parking in this narrow trail for a much broader, wider public space and greenway. In Houston, these are not only about old railroads and transit, but also drainage ways, degraded waterways, the bayous that drain Houston had been sort of engineered over time and streamlined and straightened, but that way of managing floodwater didn't really do the job, and now they're reintroducing vegetation and wildlife to these corridors, and in the process making greenways and having impacts on the urban communities around them and economic development, art and health and all those kinds of broad array of ideas. I'm in love with the Los Angeles River. I mean, who even knew we had a river? I mean, except for every post-apocalyptic movie coming out of Hollywood. But there's been a movement since the 80s to transform this channel back into some kind of river again, some kind of life-affirming new infrastructure.
that, like the Atlanta Beltline and all these other projects, will not only change the physical form of the city, but also change the way that we think about those places, where our expectations are for our lives and for our communities and what we might do in LA when we visit. It's really profound. And to make a particular note on this one, the Army Corps of Engineers, which originally channelized the LA River in the 1930s, literally paved with concrete 50 mile, 80% of the 50-mile long river, just a couple years ago agreed to $1 billion restoration, one short piece of the Glendale Narrows. So we're not only talking about catalyzing the physical change, we're catalyzing, and not only really even our own sort of culture and way of life, but catalyzing changing in government structures and the way that we do things, the kinds of decisions that we make. And the Federal Highway Administration didn't exist before highways. We're innovating this new kind of infrastructure, this new way of thinking about infrastructure, and out of that will also come a lot of change in the organizations and agencies that are charged with building these places and these infrastructures. In New York, they're embracing the elevated FDR highway with a new Blueway concept for the East River. In Memphis, I love this project to elevate a cantilevered roadway off an old railroad bridge that goes up and over the Mississippi River, and being rebuilt as a new trail over the Mississippi. It's really beautiful. But it doesn't have to be big infrastructure projects like that. This is Indianapolis, the cultural trail around, a little loop around downtown, where they took lanes away from streets that had overly wide streets and sort of reclaim that space for people, and a beautifully branded trail that connects several cultural institutions in downtown and sort of redefining what downtown is and what people do when they go there, live there. And in the process, of course, in all of these projects, we're building more than just infrastructure, we're building new lives. I wanted to talk about why this matters, and not to get too cheesy or now, but these are my kids, and they're growing up with this as their worldview. My worldview was shaped by I-285, and their worldview is being shaped by the Atlanta Beltline, and it gives you a hope in the face of a lot of other much larger changes that we face, that we have a chance of fixing it. And it's fun to look and see how they see it, but also how others are seeing it. When the New York Times did this article a couple of years ago, they talked about the Beltline, 22 miles, this or that, transit trails, but they're really talking about how it's changing the way that we live our lives. And I don't usually, walk down a trail playing the violin with my dog in the back of the cooler, but this lady's out there all the time, and she's contributing to her, improving her own life, living the life that she wants, but also enriching the lives of the rest of us by making the city interesting again. And so while I do get to travel quite a bit and share a story, I also live on the Beltline. This is me giving my daughter's Girl Scout troop a tour of the project, my commute to work, my sweet dog's last walk. It's fun to go out and see people on it. They're not only commuting and out there getting exercise, but people going out on dates, women in serious heels going out for the evening. It's fun to see people organizing their lives around this section of trail in every season and every time of day. And so this is my daughter on the right. That's her worldview. That Atlanta's the kind of place that you can ride your bike across town. My wife was traveling a couple weekends ago, and I took the kids to the grocery store, and they were complaining about it. And they said, can we at least ride our bikes? And I said, of course, we can ride our bikes to the grocery store. That's what people in Atlanta do. That's how we move around. Just pretty remarkable to be able to say that in a place like Atlanta. And of course, from their perspective, Atlanta is the kind of place where all that is normal, and that gives you a lot of hope for the future. And so I love thinking about it that way. I also love seeing what other folks think about that. And Dick Jackson is a hero of mine. Lived a long time in Atlanta as director of the CDC's National Center for Environmental Health. Now teaches at UCLA, and talks a lot about the Beltline and its role in public health. That it does more for public health than any prescription that you could write, because it gets people out and provides them an opportunity for physical activity. This is a woman I met a couple of years ago on the southwest part of the Beltline, where it's not yet built, and she was excited about the transit and the trails and all that, but mostly she was excited about the economy that was going to bring to her community. She's a new business owner. She's a fashion designer, and you can see the models in the background there. She was excited that it was going to bring an economy to her community that was going to support her business, that was going to help her support her family, in the same way that interstate highways supported my parents' lifestyle and what they wanted out of their lives, and economic prosperity for our family. The Beltline is an infrastructure that can do that today. And when Secretary Fox came to town from USDOT a couple years ago, he didn't call the Beltline a great way to move from point A to point B. He called it a ladder of opportunity, a game changer for Atlanta. And that's exactly what this kind of infrastructure is supposed to do. And if you haven't been to Atlanta and you want to see the Beltline, you should definitely plan on coming. Any time of year is great, but the Lantern Parade, which is, I think, the first Saturday of September, you want to check. So just a really great story. This woman, Chantel Ritter, with the crew of the Grateful Gluttons, decided that a parade is something that you participate in, not something you watch. And they had this idea of having homemade lanterns and walking down the trail in the dark. And the first year they did it, they had about 200 people, which was pretty good. And then the next year, about 400 people. And the next year, about 800 people. Next year, about 1,200 people. The next year, there were 12,000 people. And the next year, there were 20,000 people. And last September, there were over 60,000 people walking down the trail in the dark with kids and family and fun, shoulder to shoulder for 2 miles of the East Side Trail, for hours of just floods of people going by with homemade lanterns and laughing, and really illustrating a pent-up demand for our cultural life in the city that wouldn't have happened without the Atlanta Beltline. And so it's important to see that at this point especially, I mean, the trail is just a 2-mile slab of concrete, but it creates an infrastructure for a way of life that a lot of people really want, and it's changing everything about the city in a really profound way. And Gwen Cleese Fleming, who's now the Chief of Staff at US EPA, but used to be in Atlanta. She's from Atlanta, from Georgia. They gave us our Smart Growth Project of the Year in 2013, not only because we were cleaning up environmental problems by attracting the private market to clean up environmental problems, but also that then something was happening with that land that really became a community asset. I think that's really powerful. And I'll end on this as the last slides, but just to say, to show you what it looks like. This is the Beltline just a few years ago, and this is what it looks like today. It's a couple of years old, but I was taking my kids for this bike ride and was taking pictures, trying not to have a wreck. And I got home and I decided this is my favorite picture I've ever taken of the Atlanta Beltline, not because it was a beautiful day and people are literally, you can hear them when they pass, smiling because they're so in love with their city again, but it's because of this woman on the right with the red hair. She's carrying her groceries, and in the process she's validating everything that we always said that the Beltline would do, that it's making a whole new way of life possible for people. And now you see people out there carrying their groceries all the time on the Beltline. And that's not even done. The trail isn't even finished. The stairs and ramps are not all in, and the train is not in. At this point, that Sears building in the background wasn't even open. And so you can imagine how much more change is coming as we continue to build out the project. So with that, we can open it up to questions. Christine, I think you're going to handle that. And thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks. Again, folks, you can type your questions in the chat box found in your webcast toolbar to the right of your screen. Okay, let's get started. So the Atlanta Beltline concept seems so obvious and beneficial to the city and its neighborhoods, but what kind of opposition did you have to overcome?
That's a great question. I know it sounds kind of ridiculous, but obviously there were challenges along the way. I wouldn't call any of it really opposition, because we built a movement of people. The people of Atlanta believed in this project before anybody else. And that group, that grassroots movement, really did include everyone. We were of a broad, diverse group of people of all economic stripes and socioeconomic stripes, and from all the different communities along the route in Atlanta. And so it really did enjoy that support, and that did preclude, I think, a lot of sort of opposition from ever gathering any real momentum. Obviously, for neighborhoods that were on lower, who represent folks with lower incomes, the problem wasn't that people didn't want the project; they did want to. The challenge was they were afraid that either it wasn't going to really come to their community, it was only going to be built in other parts of town, or that if it did come, they would not be, they'd be displaced and would not be able to afford to stay and enjoy it. And so that the question of gentrification, I think, and displacement is probably the biggest challenge that we've had. But because folks were at the table, because they were part of our vision, and because our vision is accountable to them, you know, I think we have a pretty good chance of addressing those things. We've done a lot. 15% of the tax increment finance district goes to affordable housing. We're with a commitment to 5,600 units over the course of the build-out of the project. That's a lot, especially for Atlanta. It's not enough, but it's a start. And there are other tools for tax breaks and stuff, people, to sort of toolkit being put together to help people be aware of it. I think the main thing is that, to point out in that case, is that what we haven't done enough. We are having the conversation in a way that we wouldn't, and the Beltline is actually the vehicle for that conversation. It's catalyzing that dialogue that are pretty confident would not be it's not that it wouldn't be happening, it just wouldn't be happening at this scale, at this level of intensity. I think that the other challenge that we have that's important is funding. We could not, you know, Georgia generally doesn't pay for things. We don't, politically, we don't have a history of supporting things like transit and greenways and stuff like that. So we were lucky to, because the city is a little bit different politically, able to pass a tax increment district, which gave us money and separated us from every other idea. We did have broad bipartisan support in the state legislature. It just never translated quite into funding. But I'm convinced that that is also a big reason why the legislature is giving us the opportunity to vote on transit this fall. And the Beltline will be a big part of that. So while it's been a long time, we've been working really hard at it to get the funding, cobble up something together. You know, we are getting there, which is exciting.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Have there been concerns that have come up regarding safety when trails are directly adjacent to transit? And if so, how are those concerns addressed?
The safety concerns adjacent to transit are not really an issue. These trains are not fast moving. They won't be running any faster than a streetcar would down a downtown street. They're going to stop every half mile or so for a station, so they're not even going to, you know, you just can't get up to a significant speed. The distance between the trail and the train, there are a few places where it's less than 5 feet, and in that case there would be a cable barrier. Basically, it doesn't stop anybody from climbing over it, really. It just stops people from, if you wreck on your bike, that you're not going to go flying into the tracks. And that's really it. The transit is designed to be able to walk across, so they're fairly permeable. Yeah, so I guess that's it. More broadly, for public safety, there are some stretches that are somewhat isolated feeling, and at least in the near term until the development gets built out. And so the Atlanta Police Department has created a path force that's focused on bikes, and they have their special team out on the Beltline, which is great.
Okay. What is the housing density per acre in the area around the bikeway? And with that, would the trail be as successful if the area wasn't as dense?
I don't know the specifics, and of course it varies considerably along the way in terms of the existing density. The East Side Trail is literally mobbed with people. I mean, it's ridiculous how crowded it gets in the evenings and on the weekends. It is partly because there has been a lot of development there since the Beltline, but also some before the Beltline was built. But people are coming from all over. I know just anecdotally, on my street, because I live right on it, people from all over you can tell by the license plates and cars, people drive in from all over the region and unload their strollers on their dogs and spend the day out on the Beltline, which is really great. So the demand, the volume of people is, it's hard to say exactly how much of that is local and how much is other people coming in, because the railroads, because the corridor really does, some areas are very low density residential, typical kind of streetcar suburb densities, still walkable neighborhoods, but low density too, pretty significant, but never really a downtown kind of density. It just varies quite a bit. And of course, the East Side has seen a lot of growth over the last 30 years. And the Beltline is fueling that growth and amplifying it. But the West Side Trail is going to be a different story. It's the first new thing in probably 40 years. And so it'll be similarly catalytic in terms of its growth and amplify good, positive, compact urban growth, but it'll come necessarily more slowly just because there's just less there now. I'm not sure. It'll be interesting to see what the volume trail sort of use volume is on the west side when it opens. Yeah. I suspect it's still going to be high.
Okay. Next question. Understandably, your examples of catalytic infrastructure are drawn from large metro areas. Can you think of any examples in smaller towns?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I regret I don't have a lot of examples. I do know that they're there. I just haven't had the time to do a lot of research on them. And a lot of them, smaller communities often are easier because they just literally fewer people sort of deal with, and as long as people aren't inclined to do something, they find a way to do it. Their challenges seem to be more financial, not having the resources to do something, but the projects are also typically smaller. So, yeah, I'm sorry I don't have any great examples for you on that.
Okay. Were there any challenges acquiring right-of-way access for any portion of the trail?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we don't even own all of it yet. The city of Atlanta controls the northeast part of the loop and the southwest. We're negotiating for the southeast, which we logical that we'll get. The Northwest there's 3.5 miles of the 22 that will remain active freight. That's CSX, and so the idea is that the transit will share that right of way, not the tracks, but the right of way, and the trail will stem along on some adjacent properties. So the physical complexity of it is pretty high. There's some connection points into the MARTA stations too that are somewhat challenging, but one great story is that the northeast line, the part where that image is right now, was owned by Norfolk Southern. They were selling it in 2005, and unfortunately the city didn't have the wherewithal to purchase it, and a private developer bought it, and they rezoned it they were going to build linear skinny walls of buildings in it, some of them 40 stories tall, and the neighborhoods really got, people really got upset about it, and we saw it coming, and I was really afraid. This is the early days of our we built this movement, but we weren't sure if we were going to be successful, and he had done us, and we saw it coming, and I was really worried that it was going to kill the whole project. But what was really remarkable is that people came out fighting his proposals, but in defense of the vision that we had created together. And that's the power of that grassroots movement, is that people really believe in it, and they want it for their future, and they'll do anything to keep it. And they eventually won, beating his proposed rezoning that he would have needed, and he ended up selling it to the city. Now, he made a pretty penny off of it, and some believe that he knew exactly what he was doing, but in any case, the city acquired it. And so there's lots of sort of hang-ups with that around the loop, but that's probably the most dramatic.
Okay. Have you noticed that there's any economic development opportunities that have sprouted up since the Beltline has really gone gangbuster?
Does that mean like new growth?
Yes.
New developments?
Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's over $3 billion of private sector development as a direct result of the project. The old Sears and Roebuck distribution building, which is in that image, sort of in the back right, 2 million square foot building, is the largest building in southeastern United States. Was only redeveloped because the Beltline was there. The developers, Jamestown, who did Chelsea Market in New York and does a lot of big projects like that around the world, they very clearly have stated that the only reason that they were willing to take on such a big project is because of the Beltline, and they're completely just opened the interface with the Beltline. Have farmers markets out there alongside the Beltline all the time. They have hundreds of residential units and hundreds of thousands of square feet of office space, which was a surprise that the office filled up first, with tech firms, some of which moved in from 20 miles out in the suburbs because this is where their employees want to live. The developers were smart. They took this is Athena Health. They took the corporate executives out on bikes on the Beltline, and they were like, this is where the people that we want to hire, this is where they want to live, so we want our business to be here. Pretty remarkable story, and a company that's likely to grow quite a bit and create more jobs for Atlanta. Several of those kinds of stories specific to Ponce City Market, but also increasingly in other developments along the way.
Okay, and how have low-income communities in Atlanta benefited from the project? Is there any research on that?
There's a lot of research. Well, I won't say a lot. I know there's some research on some of those topics by some folks at Georgia Tech and other places. I don't know that it's conclusive yet. What constitutes economic benefit is a little bit fuzzy, or can be interpreted in different ways. And of course, the trail has not been built, and yet in some of those communities. So it's a little early to say. The West Side Trail is entirely in underserved communities, and it'll open early next year, and so we'll begin to see that. I think the challenge with, and it gets back to the question of gentrification, displacement, and access, and we still have a long way. We have a ways to go to sort of follow up on the policies that will support this new infrastructure. If all we do is build it, then we're not going to really meet our goals. We really have to follow through on the policies, especially around housing affordability and job creation. And we are doing things, but there are a lot of other things that we need to do. So I think the jury's still out on that. But there are a lot of people working on it, so we'll see.
Great. Next question. How has the Beltline affected wildlife in any way?
We had, that's a great question. We had when I was working on the design team, we had a ecologist on our team, at least for a little while. Unfortunately, didn't work out for them to stay, but they had done some high-level kind of assessment of the corridor from a ecological sort of benefit sort of perspective, and what they were saying is that it's somewhat marginal of a benefit. The corridor is very narrow, and of course we're reusing it quite a lot, and so there is room for trees to be planted and for other plants and wildlife, but that it was going to be primarily for the benefit would be primarily for connectivity of larger tracts of land around the city that would also have to be protected, expanded, and in that way, and so for birds and insects mostly. And so I don't know that much about it, but I think the primary opportunity for it was from a demonstration standpoint and learning to illustrate the value of sort of urban ecological ideas and issues, to teach those things and then allow people to do those things in their own yards and in their community parks and things like that. The 1,400 acres of new parks, obviously, they're along the Beltline. That's part of that new sort of connectivity, and would provide a little bit more density to that, the ecological sort of framework for that. But the city of Atlanta is about to sorry, I'm losing my words, get a urban ecology framework done, a real view of what the ecological condition and opportunity is for the city of Atlanta, and we'll see the Beltline will certainly play a role in that. But we'll have to see.
Okay. Next question. Has the Beltline affected the homeless population or vice versa that you're aware of?
As abandoned railroad corridors, there were some homeless camps along the way. And obviously, as the construction comes to those corridors, they are removed. There are some, I'm blanking on the name of it, there are some new homeless initiatives in the city that I believe they were participated in that removal, and the people who live there. I'm not familiar with the details of that. But okay. I wouldn't say it was substantial. It was funny. It was interesting because the corridor was used by people for walking to connect, even as abandoned railroads. But there were some encampments, but not more than a couple of dozen people probably total for the whole loop.
Okay, thanks. Are there any specific parking areas where folks that are coming, maybe who don't necessarily live right around it, that can just jump right on it but have to drive to it? Are there designated parking areas or put-in areas along the way?
No, and by design, no. It's really designed for people who live in the city and the redevelopment of the area along the way. There are plenty of streets, and there's plenty of street parking, and so people who come can park on the street. But the idea is we don't want to waste a lot of land on parking when what we're trying to create is a walkable urban environment. And so, yeah, so that's sort of the idea. There are a lot of trails being built connecting into the Beltline from other communities. Again, part of the idea is to catalyze this sort of regional network of trails so that no matter where you live, not only in the city but in the region, you would be able to get there by bike or foot.
Okay. And for the most part, the areas that are developed, are they concrete? And are any of them permeable, or are there sections of gravel, or what is the main type of paving for
Sure.
the Beltway?
For the trail itself, it's concrete, and the primary reason for that is that the path foundation, which is the trail building partner in this, is that's what they build, and that's what they believe in. And there was a lot of debate about the material of the trail, but that's where everybody landed. There is you can see in that last image, a running shoulder on the side that's supposed to be a permeable crushed stone, crushed granite surface. I'm not sure that is permeable anymore after being pounded into the ground, but it's also not built yet. But there's so much high traffic that it needs to be a durable, permanent surface, and people, in heels and narrow wheels and things, it really has to be a hard surface. There's also debate about whether to separate the pedestrians from the bikes, fast-moving people from slower-moving people, and the conclusion was to just combine everybody where they're only really separated directionally, which I think there's not much room to do much more than that. It would have been, with the topography, it would have been difficult to separate them. But also, it's an interesting sort of ballet of people when it's crowded, learning to sort of accommodate everybody. I think it's quite nice, actually.
Okay, we'll make this one the last question. What is the total cost of the entire Beltline, and what were the major funding sources?
The total cost is, obviously a rough estimate that has changed over the years. It keeps getting higher. Currently, we're looking at about $4 billion. And that includes everything. So that's all the new parks, that's all the housing subsidies, that's all the streetscapes connecting into the Beltline. There's a lot to it than just the corridor itself. I believe the transit on the corridor, to give you to break that down a little bit, the transit for the full 22-mile loop would be about $1.5 billion. And so that would be what would be funded in the transit referendum in the fall. So about $4 billion. And what was your second part of the question?
Major funding sources.
Oh, right. So the primary funding source public funding source that we got was the tax increment finance district. And in Georgia, we call it a tax allocation district, but it's the same thing. And that'll generate about $1.5 billion. So the big chunk of the project cost and allowed us to sort of get going and move it forward. We've gotten a lot of private sector money for early land acquisitions, and the construction of the East Side Trail, for example, is all privately funded. and we have, money in there, the parks bond for parks on the Beltline, and there's money in there for federal money for transportation and some of the planning and design. And the Eastside, I think the Eastside Extension has extra money in it, and the West Side Trail that's under construction, that's got a Tiger grant, USDOT. There's EPA money, there's NEA money, there's because the project is broad programmatically, it can tap into lots of different kinds of money. If you're really interested in that question, you can go to the beltline.org and download the strategic implementation plan, and it describes all the sort of anticipated flows of money. The big one though is this referendum in the fall, which I keep mentioning because I hope that some of you are in Atlanta and you will vote for it. But it's a sales tax. It's a half-penny sales tax for transit within the city of Atlanta, not the region. And if you're familiar with Atlanta, Metro Atlanta's transportation votes, referendums, they fail. But this one, the city of Atlanta, fairly confident it will pass, and it will generate over $2.5 billion for transit within the city of Atlanta. That's enough to build the whole Beltline and do a lot of other things too. And so parallel to that, there's another referendum for T-Splost, which would support Beltline in other ways from the trail and connectivity. So really excited about that, and assuming that passes would be obviously the new largest sort of public funding source. The problem with the TAD is it's been slow in coming. You have to wait for it to come in over time, and this is money that you can bond against, so it would come much faster.
Okay, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and close up shop. Just as a reminder, this is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube, and a PDF of the presentation will also be available on our webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Just give us a couple hours to get those up. And Ryan, thank you for joining us today. This was great. Good luck with your book, and thank you for the Transportation Planning Division for sponsoring today. And we will talk to everyone next time.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.